Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, like Linda said, it's good to see people at a live meeting for the first time since 2020. So my name is Jim Lane. I'm the Canadian sort of co-chair for the conference board. So like Linda said, we'd like to sort of get through to the fishing opening dates or closing dates and a general discussion or beginning discussion on coast-wide perspectives of TCUIs or mortality limits. So we're going to go through the accreditation process first. So there may be some mistakes in this, so we're going to go through, and there's also people online. So we'll start with in the room here, and I'll start on the U.S. side because that's got the longest list.
Okay, so I'm going to go through, call out people's names and the areas they represent, make sure we have the right name with the right area. And then at the end, I'll ask if there's anybody who's here that plans to be a voting member that I didn't call to speak up. Okay, so Lenny Herzog, Area 4 Concerned Fishermen. Great. Tom Gemmel, Halibut Coalition. Here. Jim Johnson, Deep Sea Fishermen's Union. Rebecca Skinner, Alaska Whitefish Trawlers Association. Ray Melodov, do you have someone else for Ray?
Couldn't make it, so it's Joe Kashavarov.
Okay, you got that. Okay, we'll get the name spelled out later. Okay, and then I have John Moeller for ADAC Community Development Corporation. Great. Rob Worm for Kodiak Vessel Owners Association. Megan O'Neill for Petersburg Vessel Owners. This has Dan Falvey for Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association. He's online. Okay, you got him. Per Odegaard for FVOA. There he is. Paul Wilkins for Coastal Villages Regional Fund. Here. Jeff Kaufman, St. Paul. Phil Wyman for Sitka Black Cod and Halibut Marketing. Here. Mark Carroll for Cordova District Fishermen's United. There's Mark. Garrett Elwood for NGFA. Got it. Duncan Fields for Ozinki Community and Cape Barnabas. Got him. Oh, we have John Bruce for Deep Sea Fishermen's Union. What's that? Oh, okay. It's not the John Bruce I was thinking of. Okay. All right. Forrest Braden for Southeast Alaska Guides Organization. Got him. Garrett Lambert, Alaska Charter Association.
Here.
Brian Ritchie, North Country Charters.
Here it should be Homer Charter Association, but I don't know if it matters that much.
Did you guys get that? Homer Charter Association. So Brian's, that's who he's representing. Steve Ritchie for Bristol Bay Economic Development. There he is. Okay. Angel Drabnica for Apicta. She's down there. Chad C. for the Freezer Longline Coalition. Do we have anybody else here for Freezer Longline?
Chad C's online.
Oh, he's online.
Yes.
Okay, so he's online. Okay, Carter Hughes for Seafood Producers Cooperative. He's online, right?
Sorry.
Is Carter Hughes online?
Yes, Carter Hughes is
Okay.
online. And please, you should say it in the microphone.
Okay, Carter Hughes is online. We have Linda Kozak for KVOA, but we're not. Rob is the KVOA person, so I think Linda's just listening. Rob is voting. Jim Hubbard for Crusoe Fisheries. You can cross out Dan because we have him twice. Kathy Hansen for SIFA online, right?
Kathy Hansen is online.
Okay. All right, Malcolm Milne for North Pacific Fisheries Association.
Present.
Malcolm. Yeah, we got you. Okay. I have Mary Marking for Humboldt Area Saltwater Anglers. Tim Clausen, thank you. Okay, and Tom Marking for Recreational Fishing Alliance, California? No Tom? Not online?
Tom Marking? did you say?
Yeah,
Yep.
is he
He's
online?
online.
Okay, and voting, I guess? Yes? Okay, all right, that's our full list. So did I miss anybody that's registered? That's here to vote? Go ahead. Lane McBryce,
Landry Price with Yukon Delta.
did you get it?
Pierce?
Landry Price.
Landry Price, and did you get the group?
And your organization?
YDFTA.
Had them in our group.
Oh, that's what happened. I knew I did it. YF. It's not quite Y. It's in the Canada list by mistake.
Just one note, we are being broadcast and recorded, so if you can use the microphone, it's a big room, it's difficult to hear, so that makes it easier for everybody, especially folks online. Thank you.
Hey, Linda. John Mueller, ACDC. Is the Elliott Corporation still accredited?
I don't have Elliott Corporation on here. Will you have a rep for Elliott Corp? Is someone here to represent? Oh, sorry. Can you give us your name?
Chase Berenson.
Okay, did we miss anybody else on the US side? Cool.
Okay, for the Canadian side, Annabelle Halibut Association, Terry Henshaw. BC Halibut Longliners Association, Lauren. Yep. BC Northern Trawlers Association, Robert. Here. Canadian Sablefish Association, Tom Russell. Council Haida Nation, who's representing Council Haida Nation? I got
Sean Calbar here.
Okay. FAS Seafoods, Ben Cameron, sorry. BC Groundfish Hook and Line Association, Ken Wing. Halibut Advisory Board, Dave Boyes, yep. Island Marine Aquatic Working Group. I think they're sitting just as observers, so we'll take them off the voting list. North Pacific Fisheries Association, Malcolm Mill. That sounded familiar.
Can't have them.
No, okay.
You get to vote twice.
Northern Halibut Producers, Douglas Maven. Good. National Tribal Council, that will be me, Jim Lane. We have a representative here. Pacific Coast Vessel Owners Guild, Zeke Peligan. Good. Pacific Halibut Management Association, Chris, good. South Vancouver Island Anglers Coalition, Christopher Boss, good. Sports Fish Advisory Board Maine, Jerry Christensen. Sports Fish Advisory Board North is Michael Fowler. I think he's online. Yep. Sports Fishing Advisory Board South, Chuck Ashcroft.
Here.
Sports Fishing Institute of BC, Owen Bird. Okay. Okay. United Fishermen's and Allied Workers Union, Russell. Vancouver Island Longliners Association, Lyle. West Coast Fishing Guides Association. I think we're missing one. We missed anybody? Yes. Remind me again. Use the mic.
Okay. Ted Brookman, BC Wildlife Federation.
Angus Grout, Steveston House.
Name again?
Angus Grout, Steveston Halibut Association. Nothing.
Where? Who said that?
Oh,
Yeah, Angus, you want to use just get a little closer, please?
Angus Grout, Steve.
Okay.
Robbie Hagelin, BC Tuna Fishermen's Association.
Just a minute. Sorry, what was that again?
Robbie Hagelin, BC Tuna Fishermen's Association.
Anybody else?
Daniel Smith.
Daniel Smith. Oh, thought I called you guys out. Atlegay Fishery Society. Did I miss you? Okay. Yeah, I got you down here. Thank you. Anybody else? Canadian section in the room? You're here now. Owen. Not Owen. Okay. Anyone online in Canada that we haven't heard from? That's a rep as a member? Okay. New accreditation.
Send your list.
Yeah,
over to them.
yeah,
Yeah, so these are all accredited.
yeah.
Ready?
Yeah, I know the new accreditation. So is there a couple in yours or what?
So do we have new accreditation? Are they present online? Well, FBA is already represented by some. If people online can't speak that. And I would. Yeah, here is for FBOA. Okay.
Okay. Do you have any new accreditations?
So we just have a couple people on, one person online that we're not sure if they are wanting to represent someone and vote. And I'm not sure if they can, are there mics enabled yet online? Is there a way that, they're telling us they can't speak, the online people. Okay, all right, so we're getting the mics turned on. And then my question, Patty Phillips was a new accreditation who's online, and I'm not sure if she is listening, observing, or looking to represent and vote. So just waiting to hear from Patty. But do you have anybody in the meantime, or?
I haven't heard anybody.
Okay, all right, so we just have that one question. And just let me know when she can respond.
So who would she represent? Or do you know?
That's what I'm asking. I don't know. She's mayor of Pelican. I'm not sure if she's voting. Okay.
She can respond.
Okay, so Patty, I'm hoping you're able now to respond. And our question was, were you applying to be accredited and represent a group and vote on the conference board US side, or are you listening, observing today?
I would like to vote, thank you.
She just muted herself.
I would like to vote. I don't know how to make this talk. I would like to vote.
Okay.
She's speaking, but we can't hear her.
Oh, yeah. So she is responding, but no one can hear her. Is
We
that
can't
right?
hear her.
Patty, just send me an email.
I would like
How
to
about that?
vote.
And let me know, and we'll keep working on the tech side.
Okay.
Oh, we got you. All right.
Thanks.
So can you let us know if you're looking to represent a group and vote, or your intent was to observe and listen? All right, I think, Patty, I'm going to try one more time. I hope you can hear me, and I'm just looking to find out whether you're looking to be accredited to vote, or if your intent is to observe and listen without voting.
I will vote.
Okay, can you let me know who you're representing, what group you're representing on the conference board?
Can I represent Pacific Fishing Inc., our corporation?
Got it. Okay, thank you. Pacific Fishing Inc. Corporation, Patty Phillips, and will, US, she's US, yeah. Okay, so we're adding one to our list. All right, thanks, Patty.
So there's one housekeeping thing we should announce now, that this is the final meeting for us as co-chairs of the conference board. So we either have to, and the election, we switched it out to be the end of the conference board meeting. So at the very last part of the agenda item will be the election of co-chairs for the US and Canadian side. So you guys can think of how you want to do that. So gone through accreditation, so it's adoption of the agenda and arrangement of session. So we probably need a motion for adoption of the agenda, or are there some changes that people want to add to it?
Mr. Chair, if you've tallied everything up, for the record, could we have the number of accredited people for each country that you've recorded there? Thanks.
So it's 27 for Canada. We're going to get to that a bit later, but. So while they're doing that, is there any changes to the agenda people want to see, or anything you want to add? Yes?
This isn't for the agenda. This is a question about scheduling. Do you anticipate the election to occur on the 26th, or will it be the evening of the 25th?
Good question. That was ambiguous of me. It's tomorrow.
Thank you.
So the meeting wraps up tomorrow there, and then there's a report reviewing session Thursday morning where we go through the report with everybody. But as far as the meeting itself, a substantive items, it's over tomorrow.
I think we have 32. Okay. Yeah, so we're pretty sure we have 32 on the US side, and we're just going through it one more time. But so we're at the point we just need to know if anybody wants to add anything to the agenda, or if you're happy with the agenda. If you are happy, we need a motion to say we're approving the agenda, and a second so we can move on. Thank you. Is there a second? Lyle. Okay, are you guys getting people making motions, or am I keeping track of that? All right, so Chuck, Lyle.
No, that was Jerry.
Oh, Jerry,
But
sorry.
I don't think we really go by, just Canada made a motion, seconded,
Okay.
and then I think we just do show of hands.
Okay, any objection to the agenda? Everybody good with it? Fine. Kathy, go ahead.
I trouble with the volume. I'd like to add in a discussion about the MSAB terms of reference, particularly the term limit recommendations that the Secretariat is making.
Yeah, and we're just trying to find out where you want to take that up. So you want to add that to the, it would be 3.2 after we talked about, go through the MSE update?
Yep.
Thank you. Any other additions? Okay, anybody? Well, let's just try this. Any objections? Cool, we have an agenda. All right.
So all in favor, raise your hand.
Or do we need to do that?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. All in favor, raise your hand. All in favor of the motion to adopt the agenda? Thank you.
All those against?
Any against?
Abstentions?
And any extensions?
Okay, good.
So I guess our next is to have Ian give us a presentation, right? On the mortality limits.
Ian here? Why don't we start?
Or Alan, we could start with either of those if either are available. Or Ray. Sorry, I thought we had people sort of teed up already.
Linda?
Go ahead, Kathy.
For the people online, when you're doing votes, how do you want to do that? Do you want to thumbs up and thumbs down? Have us?
Okay, great. So that's a great question. So we'll do thumbs up for you vote yes, thumbs down, you vote no, and a raised hand is an abstention.
Yes.
And I guess, yeah, we'll just have to figure out how we are monitoring the online site. I guess it'll just be, you'll let us know when people have a hand raised to say something from online. Okay. All right. So, and if you're online and you want to say something, put your hand up. We'll have everybody put their hands back down before we vote. And then we'll have staff let us know that hands are up.
Yes.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, thanks. Is the chat or are the people online that have voting privileges, are they set up by US or Canadian contingents, or are you going to have to be searching around to see where they belong? Is there an easy way to look at that for you or not?
So I think we have written down who everybody's representing, and we'll just be clear about that when they vote. Was that your question? So we know which country they're, yeah, we'll keep track. Okay, so Alan is on his way. Ian is currently presenting to the processor group. So we will start with the MSC update as soon as, there he is. Alan gets here.
Wow, this is great seeing you all. This is a sensitive microphone. Well, I don't have anything to present to you because I just presented this morning. If you want to look at any of the slides, we probably can bring them up. And I think I can just take any questions if anybody has any questions. As a little quick review, in my presentation this morning to the commissioners, we talked about the objectives and the priority objectives, which is a small number of objectives that the commission asked us to focus on. And it was noted during the conversation that there might be other metrics of importance, especially to stakeholders. So something that is useful, I think, for the conference board to think about are there other metrics, are there other objectives that you have for the fisheries? Are there things that are important to you? So that would be worthwhile to think of. We walked through size limits showing the potential increase in total yield coastwide TCEY when removal of the size limit. But again, are there other things that I did not present that are important to consider when the commissioners for the commissioners to consider when they make their decision on size limits? And then the second management procedure was multi-year assessments, and that was looking at an annual assessment, a biennial assessment, or a triennial assessment, where in the non-assessment years, we would just simply use the FIS observations to adjust the TCY up and down and to redistribute it. So with that, that's a quick review. And if you have want to talk about anything, I'm here for you.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Jerry Christensen, Canada Sport Fishing Advisory Board. I have a question that, and maybe I'm the only one who's confused in the room, and that probably is typical, but the presentation you made this morning indicated a recommendation to the commissioners of the move toward implementation of no size limit. What surprised me about that is, and I'm not part of the MSAB, but what I guess is that proposal a recommendation of IPHC staff, and how does the making of that proposal relate to the work of the Management Strategy Advisory Board?
Thanks, Chuck. Great. Gary? Jerry.
Yeah.
I'm Jerry, he's Chuck.
Oh, I'm sorry about
My
that.
mistake.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jerry. And so thanks for that. Great question. The role of the MSAB is to guide the MSE process. The role of the MSAB was never to make decisions or, to provide specific advice to the commission. It was to guide the MSE process, and they've done that well. We've given the latitude to the MSAB to make recommendations when they wish, and the MSAB did not make any specific recommendations on size limits when we met in October, other than what Adam Kaiser presented before mine, saying size limits need consideration of other metrics as well as these objectives of the commission. So the MSAB didn't weigh in specifically on whether or not removing the size limit would be a useful way forward. So then at the interim meeting, discussions with commissioners, they wanted to focus in on these priority objectives, those 4 objectives. Looking at those 4 objectives and using only those 4 objectives, the advice coming from that would be to remove the size limit. And so that's where that advice is coming from. So it's not really a staff recommendation, but it's using the MSE observations or the results from the MSE, the objectives they're being weighed against. The most optimal management procedure is removal of the size limits. So we're just guiding them to where, using those objectives to guide their decision making. And that's my point. If there are other objectives that the commission is not considering, it'd be useful to let them know about those.
Chuck, and then Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm going to discuss a little differently, and it's the change in size discussion, and which we thought was to be discussed, not necessarily was coming as a recommendation for this meeting. At least my interpretation at the MSAB. But in the SRB 02107 slide 35 program of work, and it's on migration rates, and where you have juveniles ages 2, 3, and 4-year-olds migrating the order of 60% from Region 3 to Region 2, and I've talked to you about this as well, and thank you for the information. And age 5 will migrate up to 40% from Region 3 to Region 2, and then it starts to drop down after that. Now, doesn't this shift in knowledge on migration dictate that we actually need to consider this change in size limits before we actually implement and put it into past a recommendation? I think we have to look, me being from Region 2, we have to look at the impact that the lack of the impact on migrating fish, if we end up now starting to remove these, what we've considered juvenile fish, from the waters, is that going to create a downstream effect of lack of loss of fish moving to 2A, 2B, 2C, the eastern areas anyhow. And full transparency in this case, I'm interested in Region 2 and 2B in particular. So I ask that if you can give some advice on how much we're going to affect migrating fish in doing this. And then I have another question after that, but I'll let others speak first. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Another great question. And yes, it's really important to consider that migration route, as well as the current knowledge we have about migration and the uncertainty of how fish may migrate through these areas. The MSE simulations and the operating model used in the MSE actually use those exact migration rates. So these results are looking at the downstream effects of changing the size limit on, say, Region 2. It's accounted for in that work. What was I going to say other than that? Thinking back to your question there. One important consideration is how accurate are those migration rates, and there's uncertainty that we introduce into this process to get at that, to get at a robust outlook on this. And Yeah, I think that's about what I have to say is the migration rates are included in there. Oh, the other thing was this is for the directed commercial fishery only. And as far as I understand it, the directed commercial fishery does encounter some fish under 26 inches, but not a lot of fish. Maybe, I don't know, 1 to 5% of their catch would be under 26 inches. And a 26-inch fish is probably in that 5 to 6 year old range, I'm guessing. You don't quote me on that. But when the fish are moving at these really high rates at 2 to 3 and age 4 and maybe 5, they're going to be less encountered by the directed commercial fisheries. And I think that's why we saw in the MSE results not a huge effect of changing the size limit on the availability in these other regulatory areas. But I do note, as Adam Kaiser noted in his presentation, is that the MSAB did talk about specific results at regulatory area levels. The commission has not focused on that. And so I did not present any results at a specific regulatory area level, or even a region, say all of Region 2, and the effects of those. If we want to look at those, we can go to the MSE Explorer, and you can find all these different metrics for your area of interest, and we can see that. And from what I remember looking at that, there wasn't a large effect on the overall mortality limit in Region 2 based on changing the size limit, but we didn't really look closely at changes in size structure in the fisheries and changes of availability of certain size fish or things like that, but we could in the future.
So I'm just going to interject a question here. So if the conference board thought that one objective for future work on the minimum size limit might be impact on regions or at the area level, that could be a recommendation from us at this point.
I think so. I don't know that we could do much more with migration rates. We've investigated that a lot. This is the best knowledge we have. We've introduced uncertainty in migration. We might be able to do a little bit more, but I think the focus might be more on what are the regional effects of changing the size limits.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to go to Chris next, and then I have Per.
Thanks. My first question, I guess, is actually to the chairs. I'm looking at the agenda. This is an IPHC informational session. Is there going to be a discussion by conference board of the MSE, sort of the questions that were posed or that we've just discussed here, or are you including it as part of this? Are you expecting conference board to vote on something or put something forward at the end of this presentation?
I guess my thought would always be when we have something, I mean, I know it says informational, but when something's on our agenda, if there are recommendations that this group would like to make, that we would entertain that.
Yeah, so if it's the question that Linda just posed, but also, if there's still a lot of people that want to have, more in-depth discussions, we can always request a special session to the commissioners for a special session, after the annual meeting to have a more in-depth sort of focused discussion, give it a little more time for people to think about things, pose some questions and stuff like that. So if that's something that conference board want, we can put that as a request to the commissioners.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I sort of want to follow up. I think that's a great idea, Jim. I think there's a lot in that presentation. There's a lot of information there about the objectives. I mean, looking at the objectives, I think, I support making them simpler. I think making them focus at the coast-wide level. I think that us starting out looking at the regulatory area, we have the statistics of interest that can provide that information, but I think it made some of our discussions at MSAB a little more difficult, well, a lot more difficult, because it sort of turned into an allocation discussion rather than what does this management procedure mean for the health of the stock? So I think that's a good starting point. The other comment I'd make is just, I think at the special session, I think this question around, and Alan, I've raised it before, the target reference point, what does it actually mean? I think there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen around that. I think there's two different, and I understand what you're saying today, and I'm sort of trying to look at that in terms of what my normal interpretation of a target reference point would be. And just so everyone knows, when I think of a target reference point, I think, okay, a target is something we're shooting for. We're trying to hit that. Whereas if it's a threshold, as mentioned, that's something you're trying to avoid, like a limit reference point. You're trying to avoid that threshold. So I think there's actually a lot of discussion that has to happen there. So I think a special session would be a very good idea for those reasons. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And so I'm clear, you're looking for a special session that would be at another meeting, and it would be an MSAB conversation or a more open,
I think
broader?
it would be more. I think it would be a special session of the commission, which we've had in the past, which is open to the public, and it would focus on the MSE work and some of these questions that have come up about the objectives. What is the target reference point? What is it going to mean? I think there's a whole discussion around that. I think there's a lot there. And obviously, you know, we've got this size limit question now, which I think we're going to have to discuss.
Great, thanks. Okay, Per.
Since we're on size limits, geez, it's a terrible echo, isn't it? I was wondering if we could look at a more incremental drop, say to 30 inches, and what that effect would have on commercial discards. It's at 1.5 million now, and what it would have on mortality on discards, and also how it might affect the health of the stock regarding the percentage of males to females in the fishery. And is it possible to get estimates like that out of the Explorer, or do you have other tools?
Thanks, Per. That great suggestion. I like that you're bringing forward these metrics that are of interest: discards, ratios of males to females, sex ratio. And yeah, those would be easy to provide. What we haven't done right now is our simulations with a 30-inch size limit. So we could look at some of those things. I'm not sure they're available in MSE Explorer right now, but the discards are, the sex ratio, I can't remember if that's available or not, but that's something I could easily pull out of the simulation results pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was thinking a more incremental approach and see how that goes. That's not a big step. And if it doesn't look good, we can revert back to 32, or we could stay there, you know, quite easily. And it's maybe if it works out for a special session, if not, maybe we could put it on next year's agenda.
Okay, thanks, Per. But to you, a special session sounds like a good idea.
Sure.
Great. Okay. All right. I'm going to go to, I have Kathy, Dan, and then Patty online. So Kathy, you're up next.
Might put me down the list since I'm switching topic quite severely.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. We'll go to Dan.
Thanks. Can you guys hear me okay?
Got you.
All right. I had a couple of questions for Alan. And just a general question to the chairs on, you know, how much time do you want to spend on this agenda item here versus what I'm hearing is perhaps just kicking it to the commissioners for the commissioners to work on in the special session. So, you know, I'll circle back to that one at the end, but it's something to think about and give us a little direction on what you want to do. But my question to Alan, thinking of size limits, a lot of the benefits associated with those size limits flow from the fact that it increases the yield of the stock by 2 or 3 million pounds. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Dan. The main benefit of reducing the size limit would be an increase in the yield across all areas.
So what I was thinking though is if yield is not constraining, and you know, unless I'm misreading the tea leaves, we're going to leave a fair amount of, you know, potential yield in the water this year, then the effect of lowering the size limit is simply to substitute out higher valued fish for smaller, lower valued fish. So you're essentially diluting the economic value of the fishery unless you really need that extra yield to offset that impact. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. In a way, I think there's a couple other considerations that the conference board might want to consider with regard to size limits. That might be efficiency of the catch. When you go out fishing, and I do admit I have never been on a longline fishing vessel other than the survey. So when you go out fishing, you wouldn't have to be throwing the small fish over the rail. Would that increase efficiency? Would that reduce fuel costs? Potentially. And then the other big part of it is the reduction in discard mortality in the fishery. Going from that 1.5 million pounds we saw in this last year, that would probably be reduced to less than 0.25 million pounds. So it'd be reduced, we saw in the MSC results about 78%. So I guess that's another benefit.
I think that's fair. Thinking about efficiency, discard, and then economic effects. But I do think we're in a different position now in that we may not be yield constrained for a while, or at least in the next few years. And then I was a bit concerned that if we did do away with the size limit, we'd be increasing the fishing pressure on that 2012 year class, which was kind of the concern over which was one of the reasons for being cautious in setting a coastwide TCEY this year. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that does. It reminds me of the slide that Dr. Stewart showed where he showed the maturity curve in the 2012 year classes. What were they, 12, 15% mature this year, and in 2 or 3 years, they might be 65% mature. So you're right, there would be a little bit more pressure on those younger fish before they have the chance to mature and spawn. But these, with this SPR rate being used, it's still defining a fishing rate dependent or a fishing rate that's considering the spawning potential ratio, so the spawning potential of the fish, even with that lower selectivity. So the results are showing that you still have that increase in yield even after considering those effects. But you are right, if you're making that tactical decision of protecting a particular year class, then you might want to change that selectivity or keep that size limit in place.
Okay, and then just one more question, then I'll circle back to the process question. Could you, since we're asked to think about some primary objectives, and you asked us, are there any objectives that, we'd like to know more about? I've always find myself wondering, would you explain the difference between the one metric, which is median annual change, and then the AAV metric? How are those calculated, and what is each one telling you?
Yeah, sure, Dan, you're digging up my memory there. We brought in those two metrics. These are two metrics for the variability in the TCEY over years. We have the AAV, which I presented today, and then we had another metric that was called annual change. And what we found in the past was the AAV is an average over a 10-year period. So what happens with that average is if you get, in a 10-year period, if you get 1 year that was a really large amount, that average can get pulled up to that large amount, or vice versa. If it's a really small amount, that average could get pulled down. So even though it's an average, it can sometimes be influenced by outliers. It's a useful statistic in that sense. But we thought, let's take just a slightly different angle look at the variability in the TCEY, how much it changes from every year. And let's look simply at how much is it changing every year. And so we calculated as the percent change from year 1 to 2 was this, from year 2 to 3 was that, and then we just calculate the median, and then we can look at all sorts of different statistics related to that. So it's a different way of looking at it, and I think the annual change can sometimes give you a better look at those potential large ones. If you don't just look at the median of it, you can look at other statistics. So it's a different way to look at it, and we saw, I can't remember, I presented it probably a year or two ago, but we saw how they provide those different interpretations. And sorry, I can't dredge that out of the memory right now.
Yeah, no, thanks for the explanation. I always tended to like the annual change more than AAV, because if I understand AAV right, it could be, no change in year 1, then it could go up by 20, down by 20, and have 20% changes for 8 years. And as long as year 10 is the same as year 1, then you have the AAV is 0, right? So it doesn't really tell you what's going on in the middle there. You could have a lot of large swings, or you could have small incremental 2% a year for 10 years and have a 20% change, which isn't bad at 2% a year.
Yeah, and if I may interject, Dan, real quick. The other benefit of that annual change statistic is we were able to then calculate the probability that the change in the TCY was greater than, say, 15% in 3 or more years. So we could actually see how often was the TCY changing by a large amount, whereas the AAV was just simply an average over that 10-year period. So it offered the different look with different statistics as well.
Right. So I guess where I'm going with this is I probably would, depending on what we do with this agenda item, I'd probably, make a recommendation or float the idea of including annual change as one of our primary metrics. But that brings me back to the bigger discussion of the chairs. Do you want to dig into this now? Do you want to just have questions now and then schedule a time certain for this tomorrow after we do something? Or is the sense of the conference board that we should just punt this to a commissioner level meeting sometime later?
Well, I think there's if there's a couple more speakers, but I think there's the request to take a special session. So I don't think we want to. If there's some things you really want for clarification or whatever, then yeah, ask some questions. But yeah, we need to wrap this up and make the request for the special session.
Then I would really request that the minutes really talk about how the fact with size limits, the benefits are largely due to an increase in yield, and that if we're not yield constrained for the next short period of time, we may not have all those benefits that the MSE model showed. And I would also like the minutes to show that there was concern over dropping the size limit because of increased fishing pressure on the 2012 year class.
Okay, great. We'll get those in the minutes. And I think we probably are heading towards requesting a special session, as Chris suggested, because it sounds like there's a lot here to unpack and probably more than we're going to have time for. So I have Patty and then Carter, and then we'd go back to Kathy. Oh, and then Jerry and Terry. Oh, Terry. Okay. Patty, can you hear us?
So if the commission takes a slightly lower transition on the under 32 size limit to under 26, because the under 32 size limit has a 78% discard mortality. Is there a size limit whereby mortality significantly reduced, like say under 26 inch? And so my question is there a size where mortality is reduced markedly when size limit is lowered? I'd rather take a lower transition rather than a full out everything under 32. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. The answer to that is yes. And I think a 26-inch size limit gets you most of the way there. And that's because the directed commercial fishery does not encounter a lot of fish less than 26 inches. So I cannot remember the specific number offhand. It would be available in the looking up in the MSE Explorer and doing that calculation. But I would guess it's probably more than a 50% reduction in the discard mortality. Don't quote me on that. I can figure out the exact number for you. But going to a 26-inch size limit would significantly reduce discard mortality. Going to a 30-inch size limit, as Per suggested, I'm not sure how much that would be. There's a real non-linearity between 32 and 26. But 26 gets you most of the way there for most of these metrics.
Okay, Carter, you're up next. Carter, can you hear us? Oh, okay, he just dropped off. So we'll come back to Carter. Let's go to, I think we had Terry and then Jerry over here.
Oh, right. Dr. Hicks, I'm not talking about size limit right now, but more of the migration. It's known that we get fish migrating from 3 to 2. With a 200 million stock of halibut, it's more of a query than any, do you think that any of that fish goes out of the mass over kind of a rush away and gets captured there? Is there any kind of a statistic for that, or a guess of any kind?
Yes, thanks, Terry. There's a lot of unknowns with fish that sort of leave the convention area of the IPHC. We certainly have seen observations of fish going into Russian waters. How much of the fish that would be available to the convention fisheries go into Russia, we're not certain, and how much of that spawning biomass goes over there, we're not certain. We've been working with Russia, Korea, and Japan on that exact question and trying to engage them more into this process, doing tagging data and all of that. But it's something we're still learning about. The biggest area I think that might be of concern about interaction with outside the convention area would be Area 4B. Once fish come down into Region 2, there's probably very little interaction with Russian waters other than what might be young juvenile fish coming from spawners in Russia, or and that eventually end up in our lower, more southern, eastern regulatory areas. But yeah, we're working on that.
Thank you. I think we discussed it years ago. Yeah, I was just kind of curious to see if some of our stock is, well, moving that way. And I'm sure it just doesn't go clockwise down this way. Yeah, thank you.
We're learning more.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, Chuck.
And it was myself and not Jerry that was going to ask the question. If we remove the size limit, we're now taking a totally different look at how we look at U26. And in U26 has sort of been the dreaded factor where we didn't know where they were, we didn't know what was happening. Now you have a much better idea what's happening. The non-directed fisheries were supposed to be accountable and responsible for all of these, but no one knew exactly how to do it. So there's been all sorts of controversy there. So in all of this, first question is the non-directed fishery, is there going to be a relook on how you're dealing with U26 with the non-directed fishery, whether you drop down to 26 or 30 or completely eliminate? And I guess the other one is, if we do drop down to U26 for our fishery, directed fisheries, what's going to be the new U26? I mean, is it going to be U10, U15, U20? I mean, which ones are going to be now the ones that are so far down there that you can't deal with? So it's just a question.
That's a really good question, Chuck. And it's, the mortality table that Dr. Stewart presents is split out by TCYs, and 26 is sort of that magic number, O26, U26, all that thing. And so we might have to rethink how the mortality table is presented. In terms of the stock assessment and mortality to the stock, there would be no change. As Dr. Stewart's mentioned, we now account for all mortality of all sizes from all sources. So I think it would be a matter of simply just maybe not having to split out U26, O26 in the mortality table as much as we did, if the size limit was removed, that is. I said many years ago, I had a thing where we used to talk about O32 in the blue line and O26, and I said, why don't we just think about O0? And now I'm sort of flipping that around to, we have U32, U26, and why don't we just go to U0? So, do we need this 26-inch demarcation line or not? But that's something that I haven't put a lot of thought into. It's a great question.
Whoops, not seeing other hands. I think we'll go. Oh, we got more people online. Okay, I think we're looking to sort of wrap up this session. What I'm taking away from it is a recommendation for a special session. And I've got some notes down on what people want considered at that special session, but I'll give people a chance to finish answering questions or asking questions. Why don't I go to Lauren here, and then I've got a couple people online after that.
Question. If we set it at 26 inches, is it assume that those pursuing halibut will be using a 16-knot hook, a circle hook, or will they be allowed to use a 14 or smaller? Because if it's assumed that we're just going to use a 16 circle hook, then the likelihood of catching 26 or smaller are less likelihood.
Yeah, I don't think, well, I mean, I'm not proposing any regulation for the size of the hook, but it could very well be with a change in the size limit that some people fishing decide to change to a different sized hook. They could change to a smaller hook to target those smaller fish and maybe improve their efficiency or something if that's what they desire. Or they may change to a larger hook to avoid those smaller fish if they want to do those for various reasons. So what we did in our simulations is we looked at how would these results change if there was a targeting of smaller fish or a targeting of larger fish, and the benefit to the total yield increases as you target more smaller fish. And there's other consequences, but that's the main result. And then as you target larger fish, the benefit to the yield, so that increase in total TCY would be reduced. So you're right, the size of the hook is going to matter, and that could be a mechanism to target different size classes. Where people will go, I have no clue.
Okay, I'm going to try Carter and then Kathy and see if we can wrap up.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We got you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to support moving this on. There's a lot I don't, it's intuitively very unobvious to me. But there's also slinky pots that'll need to get thought about, and a lot of the halibut that's caught in Alaska is caught as along with the black cod. But yesterday I did notice that there was when they were discussing the fish and the boats that actually caught and sold the fish and the fish, there was they were paid 15% less for the under 32-inch fish. So I'm kind of looking at this as it would devalue the fishery. I don't think it's gonna, most of the boats that are out there that, a lot of them I think are catching the halibut along with the black cod. And the black cod's going to keep them out there burning fuel more, at least in Alaska. So I'd like to see this moved on. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks, Carter. Okay, Kathy.
So I have a question and then I have a motion. The question, Alan, is when the MSAB had their meeting, I understand that the IPHC rules of procedure for the MSAB were discussed. What did the MSAB have to say about the idea of term limits?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. From my memory, and I can't remember if there is something specific in the report. In fact, there might be something specific in the report that Adam talked about this morning, and that is, I think, a lot of people in the MSAB have really come in and been very impressive in giving up their time to learn about the MSC process and be a part of this process. And they felt like, if that by the time they really come up to speed with it, those term limits might be up, if I remember correctly. And I think most of the MSAB members wanted to be a part of the process as long as they could be a part of the process. I can't remember the specific language that made it into the report, but I do want to say I certainly appreciate all the time the MSAB members have put into it, the amount of learning they have done, and the amount of contributions they have made. And I think that's something that should be recognized. On the other side of that is the potential for new members to come aboard when needed. Also, we don't want to limit that. And I think there's a compromise potentially between a short or a long term limit or no term limit.
So my motion is that the conference board is opposed to any term limits for the MSAB. And if there's a second, I'll speak to it.
Second.
So I didn't see who seconded that.
That was me, Linda.
Thank you. So second from Brian, or from US. Go ahead, Kathy.
So I really appreciate the time that the MSAB members have spent on it. But I also really recognize, like Dr. Hicks said, that it takes a long time to get up to speed. And over time, people are going to have to, for various reasons, leave, and you'll get new people in there. But you have to keep a core group at all times that understand what's going on. And term limits in this particular instance, I think, is a really bad idea.
Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I guess the question here is, Kathy, what are you referring to as being term limits? Limiting to 2 terms or the size of the terms? Because I believe the new suggestion is for 4 years for the first term and 2 years for the second and ongoing terms. So I don't know that there's a limitation in terms in that respect. Thanks.
I'm opposed to both of them. I don't think there should be any kind of term limits in number of years or number of terms you can serve. I think we'd do a big disfavor to the industry to have, you know, Chris and Dan and some of these guys that have been on since the very beginning basically be moved on because they've reached term limits. I don't think this is a place where you put term limits.
Okay, Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to get in the back and forth on this, but I'm speaking for myself, being an old guy in that process. And I brought this up at the MSAB as a suggestion in order to allow for transition, but also to sign up for 2 consecutive 4-year terms. And I would be then re-signing for 4 years. I might be holding back me stepping in for another 4 years at my age. And that's why the 2 years, and it allows a transition. We just thought it meant an even flow. We just didn't want a limitation that a person had to leave in the process. And that was why that was first came up at MSAB. Thank you.
I'm not sure I understood all that, Chuck. So your recommendation to the MSAB was that there be 2 4-year limit terms, but that not a limit. It was a term? Is that?
The process was, suggestion was to have your initial 4-year term, because it takes 4 years to learn it, no question, and more. But renewing the terms, then we're on 2-year basis, and that allowed you more flexibility depending what's the situation, health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what I thought was agreed to, but not a limitation so as you had to leave the MSAB if you didn't want to.
Yeah, so so we did have quite a lot of a discussion on just the term, the limit, or whatever. And I you know, and it's no disrespect for the conference board can take this up as a motion, but I think it's probably better served as one of the agenda items on the special session. There's a lot of moving parts to have the term limits or how the structure. Part of it's how the structure of the rules of procedure for the IPHC go, and so it's something we've had a fair bit of discussion that we also didn't land on it. So I think, you know, instead of, you know, putting a motion before the conference board on here, we want to do this, let's take this further up at the special session as one of the agenda items and then see where it goes from there. Because I understand where Chuck's coming from. There's also the reality of cost. So it's like, okay, who do you know, it's sort of how many people are going to be there. That's the other part of the question we haven't talked about. But it's also, yeah, you know, some of the people have been here since 2013. And there's terms, it's sort of the structure of the organization. So I think, you know, I said, if they want to go for the motion, that's fine. But I think we may want to just hold off and put this as an agenda item for further discussion with the commissioners and see what their input is on that.
Okay, but my understanding is the commissioners are scheduled to make a decision on the terms of reference for MSAB at this meeting.
And that's under the FAC. It should be in the FAC report.
So that's part of the FAC report. So that decision will be made prior to any special session we might be able to hold. And I think that's why Kathy's moving to weigh in on this. Any other comments? Go ahead, Forrest.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to support the motion for that reason. If there was more time, maybe a discussion would be warranted, but I was there when we discussed it at the MSAB. And there's two parts to it. There's the term limit part, and I think it does take a lot of time to get up to speed, but there's also a small recruitment pool or no recruitment pool for replacement. And I think those things would naturally occur if it was time for folks to move on. Maybe not, I don't know. You could look at it. But the other part that we talked about was them shrinking the number of seats on the MSAB. And one of the comments that was made, I remember, is that you have, for instance, Sportfish seats right now. There's 3 for the US. One's unoccupied, but it probably should be occupied because there's just a vast difference in geographical areas and needs. And I see that same thing in kind of the commercial fishery. So I would not support, and I don't know if this needs to be added as an amendment, but I would not support shrinking the amount of seats that are now available. It was a budgetary concern as far as I know, and I just don't know. We talked about different approaches, like making one at a hybrid where there was one physical in-person meeting and one online to try to cut costs if that was necessary. But I did not support the idea of shrinking the amount of seats available.
So Forrest, just in the interest of moving this along, do you want to offer that as a potentially friendly amendment, that our recommendation be that there would not be term limits and you would not shrink the size of the MSAB, so we'd take it as one?
Yeah, if I have a second, I'll
Let's see if it's friendly. Kathy, is that friendly?
Yes.
And is that okay with your second, Brian?
Yes.
Okay, so now the motion is a recommendation from the conference board that there not be term limits on the MSAB and we don't shrink the size at this time. Can look at virtual and other options, but not shrink the size. Okay, any other discussion? Chris?
Thank you. We just complicated the motion now. Speaking for Canada, we can support the first part about no limits. We think we were part of that discussion, but we do believe you could shrink the size of the MSAB and it could still be effective. So I just want to make that comment that I don't know, it might be better if we could to handle them as 2 separate motions.
It probably is. I didn't realize there was going to be objection to any part of that. Okay, forget I said all that. I'll let you make a separate motion after we act on Kathy's. So, okay, any further discussion of a recommendation from the conference board that we not impose term limits on the MSAB?
Hey, Linda.
Dan.
Probably wouldn't hurt to just note as well that from the stakeholders' perspectives, there's not a lot of stakeholders who are screaming to get on the MSAB. In other words, they're there's reasonable satisfaction with existing members, and there doesn't appear to be a lot of additional stakeholders who want to enter into that process on a 2-year basis. Or maybe I'm wrong.
And that's the same case for Canada as well.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. Do we need to do a show of hands? Okay. All in favor of this motion? I think we can just, everybody in favor of the motion to recommend against term limits on the MSAB? Okay. Anybody opposed? 1. Canada. Okay. Any abstentions? Are you looking? I'm just getting that down. Okay. Thanks. So now I guess, Forrest, I'll let you make your motion and we'll see where that goes.
Okay, my motion is to not shrink the amount of seats currently represented on the roster for the MSAB. And if I have a second, I could speak to it.
Second.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, and just in review, I think that there's big geographic gaps that you would lose opportunity to hear a perspective that's needed if you shrunk the amount of seats there. I don't know if everybody's aware how many seats are on there, but there are not very many seats to start out with. If Canada feels like they're overrepresented on the MSAB, then perhaps they could voluntarily give up some seats. But I think that the amount of seats that are on there, opportunity is appropriate for the need.
Any other discussion? Chris, anybody want to make comments on this?
Yeah, looking at it, if you look at the MSAB seats, if we want representation, I mean, the question is, do you want representation at the contracting party level? At the contracting party level, there's not equitable seats distribution. I take the point that, yes, you want to make sure you've got geographical and sector representation, but you can do that with a smaller group. You can do it with the use of things like alternates, and we could have just as an effective MSAB board as we do now.
Any other comments on that? Anybody online?
We just saw some thumbs up.
Okay, all right. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. Brian Ritchie for the Homer Charter Association. For 3A sport fishermen, this is something that is important to us and is important to the constituents that I represent. We're looking to have more involvement in the MSAB and in MSC process. So I understand the concerns from the Canadian delegates here, but this is something that's important to us moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Motion is to recommend not shrinking the MSAP. It's the motion on the floor. Okay, let's see all in favor of the motion. We need to count. We're just doing these.
Sorry.
All right, go ahead.
But make sure, can you please make sure?
Yeah, we're just checking, and it's one vote per group. I'm sure people are following that rule. And then hopefully you also got the people online?
Yes.
Okay.
Just
Okay, and then let's see all opposed. Raise them up high so we don't miss you, okay? These little hands are hard to see from up here. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I got 14.
For US?
No, opposed, and they're all Canadian.
Any abstentions?
And you got online? Okay, and anybody abstaining from this vote? We have one abstention.
can you please repeat for the online voters to make sure that they have their status now, so that we'll take another one.
Okay, so we're just going to ask if people who are online, if you support the motion, thumbs up, just like clear your status, and let's do it again online because it was a little confusing. So if you support the motion being no, we're not going to, the conference board doesn't support shrinking the size of the MSAB, it's thumbs up. If you don't support it, thumbs down. If you're abstaining, it's a hand. Yes, first motion. Okay, any other comments people want to make or anything else to bring forward on that MSAB report from Alan? Okay, I think we are then, or MSC, I guess I should say, we are then, I thought, oh, I see Ian. So should we go to mortality limits next? Oh, we have Ray too. Whichever one, whatever order works for you guys with your other demands.
Just
Go ahead, Chris.
One comment on the MSAP, I think, if everyone's okay. I think Conference Board should acknowledge all the hard work of the Secretariat, but Dr. Hicks in particular on the MSAP work. There's a lot of work going into it, into the analysis, into the evaluation, into the presentations. Speaking personally, I had a question one time from Dr. Hicks. Emailed him on a weekend. It was a US weekend. He emailed me back on the Sunday. The man's dedicated. I think we need to note that in the minutes, if everyone's okay with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, pretty much goes for all of the staff all the time. Thanks for that, though, Chris. I appreciate getting that in the minutes. Okay, go ahead.
I don't have anything prepared for another presentation, but I'm happy to take questions on any topic that you'd like to hear about.
Okay, so this is the opportunity for people to ask any questions maybe you didn't have answered during Dr. Stewart's presentation earlier on mortality limits, TCUIs. If there's any questions people would like to ask, we have Dr. Hicks available. Okay, that got some hands. Go ahead, Forrest.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for all of your presentations. They're always really interesting to listen to, and we appreciate all the work that goes into it. Can you, Dr. Stewart, can you elaborate a little bit on the relationship between spawning biomass and recruitment in terms of, if we have a spawning biomass of 200 million pounds or something like that, or it's 400 million pounds, what does that translate to if we get a good environment, a good condition? Do we have twice the recruitment because the spawning biomass is bigger, or does it not work like that?
Thanks for the question. We don't know a lot about the relationship between spawning biomass and recruitment, but we know one point for sure is if we don't have any spawning biomass, we don't have any recruitment. What we do know, though, from the historical record is that we had very low spawning biomass in the late 1970s, and we had a series of great recruitments moving into the 1980s. And so that tells us that at least over the range of spawning biomass that we've observed, we haven't reached a point where it would appear that recruitment is specifically impaired by a lack of spawning biomass. And that's consistent with the biology of Pacific halibut, which is that they're broadcast spawners, and even relatively small fish can produce large numbers of eggs. So in a nutshell, very weak relationship over a broad range of spawning biomass, and it seems to be as much dependent on environmental conditions as it is on the absolute quantity of spawning biomass in the water at any point, noting that if we actually had no spawning biomass, we wouldn't have recruitment.
Could I have a follow-up, Madam Chair? Okay, and so how wrapped around the axle do we need to be about deflecting by our yield actions, deflecting, spawning biomass up or down? For instance, if we fished at status quo, maybe there's some concern that the surveys have dropped us down, but are our actions by reducing coastwide TCY by several million pounds going to translate to big gains in turning the stock around, I guess?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, I don't know what range of TCEYs you're looking at, but whatever range that is, consider that in light of approximately 200 million pounds of female spawning biomass, noting that much of the fishery catch are females that are not yet mature and or males. So not all of that's going to translate directly into an effect on spawning biomass. We don't see over any of the range that I've presented in terms of graphical projections, we don't see a large or abrupt change in the spawning biomass over the next several years. Unfortunately, the biggest consideration right now is one that we can't really quantify. It's the reliance on a single year class over the next few years. With this 2012 year class maturing, we don't currently have a good way to quantify the risk that year class may or may not mature ahead or behind schedule. And normally we wouldn't be too concerned about that because we would have multiple year classes that would all be contributing a fair bit to the reproductive output of the stock. So I realize that doesn't help you in a quantitative sense, but it is definitely something that we think is biologically relevant and worth considering in this year's process.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, Ian, I was just curious. I mean, it seems like it's becoming more and more important for us to be watching for that 14-year class. And I mean, the 14-year class and see what it does, because that was a good black cod year class too in Alaska. So a good year for recruitment, I mean. But it seems like that where would you, since it'll be 10 years old next year, where would be the first place you would start seeing those showing up? In what fisheries would you start seeing that year class to get us to see if it's first even there, or what kind of indication of stock condition it is?
Thanks, and I think you're right. I think that the 2014 year class is going to be very important as the 2012 year class matures. That's the next stop. We do get some information from Alaska Department of Fish and Game, collects recreational ages from the Gulf of Alaska. And those, although they're not comprehensive across the range of the stock, they have tracked year classes quite well. And they encounter fish in that fishery that are several years younger than we see in any of the other sources. So that would be one fishery that we could look at. If you recall, just 2 years ago, we were having a similar conversation about the 2012 year class. We had a year when we could start to see a signal from the 2012 year class, but it was quite uncertain. In fact, 2 of the stock assessment models were starting to show an increase, and 2 were actually showing a decrease because the signal was not all that clear. That's essentially the situation we're in now with the 2014 year class at 8 years old. I would say that 2 years from now, in 2024, the data from 2024 should go a long way toward telling us whether that 2014 year class is going to be above or below what we've seen in recent years.
Okay, thanks, Ian.
Do we have someone online? Okay, this is for people online. We can't tell if your hand's up to abstain, vote, or talk. So to everybody, take your hand down, and then if you have a question, put it back up if you're an online person. Anybody else in the room that has a question? Go ahead, Forrest. Or, sorry, who are you pointing to? Oh, I can't see you over there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Ben Clampett, FEOA. It's about spawning biomass. Is it possible to have a small spawning biomass correspond with high recruitment like we saw in the black cod fishery in 2014?
Yes, thanks for the question. I think it is. That's essentially what we saw in the early 1980s. We saw some good recruitments come out of what we estimate to be quite a small spawning biomass at the time. The only difference between that situation and the current stock state is that the fish are smaller for their age right now. So the fish were actually the size at age was quite large in the 1970s. But that in consideration, yes, we think the stock can produce large recruitments at a small stock size.
Go ahead, Per.
I was wondering if we could take up okay. I was wondering if we could take up opening dates and closing dates before we get into the discussion of limits, because that might go on for a while.
Well, I think we're going to try and get through these presentations. We'll get to that before we end today. We've got another a question online from Tom. So I'll go next to you, Tom.
Hi, Ian. This is Tom Working. Hey, I'm just curious. Could you run through and educate me a little better on what spawning biomass is related to relative spawning biomass and absolute biomass? And then the second part of the question is, if we start picking 36% as spawning biomass, are we then making that kind of the new ramp? Is that now just a target, or is that looked to be kind of a threshold where we then start ramping down below 36? Thank you.
Thanks. I can't speak to that. It's going to be a little challenging without any graphical support here, but in the spawning biomass that we're talking about, in 200 million pounds of female spawning biomass, that's absolute spawning biomass. That's the estimate of our pounds of female halibut that are in the water that are at or above maturity. So that's a real number. The relative spawning biomass is the spawning biomass. It's that 200 million pounds divided by the spawning biomass that we estimate would be in the water right now if we hadn't been fishing on the stock ever. So we recreate the stock dynamics, we allow for recruitments and growth and biology and all these other things, and we get an estimate of the stock size if we hadn't been taking the catch out. And that ratio between what we've actually got right now, or what we think we have, and what we think would have been there if we hadn't been fishing at all, that's the relative spawning biomass. And we estimate in 2022 that we are at the beginning of 2023, we are at 42% relative spawning biomass. But as I showed in my longer presentation, the relative spawning biomass depends on that, the denominator, which is the estimate of fish if we weren't fishing. And that was affected by the improved estimate of natural mortality this year. And so where last year we had estimated the stock was closer to 30% relative spawning biomass, we now estimate it's closer to 40%, or actually 42%. So both of those are estimates, so there's uncertainty in both quantities. With regard to our reference points, we have and continue to use relative spawning biomass of 30% and 20% as our threshold and limit reference points. So we've not proposed any changes there, and the work that Dr. Hicks has done through the management strategy evaluation has found that those reference points do keep the stock away from a conservation concern across a broad range of stock sizes and management approaches.
Thanks, Ian.
That's helpful.
Okay. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stewart. We've had previous discussions about the transparent, risk-neutral model that you've been presenting, and also about how we would build precaution maybe into the management procedure as opposed to, since it's not provided necessarily in the assessment. I guess I don't have a great way to form that into a question, but could you explain a little bit as to why we might build precaution into a management procedure, given that it's not in the assessment?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Thanks for the question, Malcolm. I think the takeaway from the change that we've made this year, with our approach to natural mortality, that value of natural mortality was selected in 1998 and known at the time to be somewhat precautionary. It was lower than the value that had been used in previous stock assessments. And at the time, with quotas going up, it seemed reasonable to essentially reduce the harvest rates a bit by going with a slightly lower natural mortality. And it was transparently advertised at the time as a precautionary step. As fishery science has evolved, it's become more important for us to not make those arbitrary choices in the stock assessments. It's not up to Alan and I to decide what the right level of precaution is. And so it is appropriate for us to remove that kind of an intentional precautionary adjustment inside the stock assessment. But as you note, that does mean that we've effectively moved part of the precaution that's been in management decisions in recent years out of the assessment and effectively onto the table for you all to consider. And I don't have an easy way to describe how big the offset is in terms of what you might consider that would be equivalent to recent risk levels. But I think it's worth acknowledging that there was some risk aversion built into previous stock assessment models, which is no longer there. Now the model represents our best estimate of stock dynamics.
Okay, could I follow up just quick? Okay, yep, and yeah, thank you for that then. And so you provided a couple slides with additional risks that would have to be considered. And so is it fair to say that we would therefore consider those risks when making our management decisions?
Yes, again, those additional risks are challenging to quantify, but we do feel like they're relevant to your decision making. They are real risks to the stock right now, but they're not things that are naturally included in the decision table. When we make projections, that only includes the dynamics that we're modeling. So things like the reliance on a single year class. If the 2012 year class matures on schedule, then there's no risk there, but that's an uncertainty and we don't have a good way to capture that. So those additional risks that we presented to you are things that we think are relevant to your decision making right now.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask one other separate question? Okay, thank you. So this is more pertaining to that because I have had a hard time getting my mind around the whole the spawning biomass relative, because I like to think of it as a function. If you have X amount of spawning biomass, you're going to have a function of how many recruits you are. But I understand that the recruitment is not, and there's no linear relationship there. But given that, so we don't know when the next recruitment event may occur. But in the meantime, it seems to me that we're fishing on a defined amount of fish. So if we make a management decision to take more fish, then until we see a recruitment event, doesn't that just mean there's going to be less fish available in the future?
Yes, the stock that with the low recruitments that we saw from 2006 to 2011, most of the fishery in the next few years is likely to be coming from this 2012 year class. So the choice of when and how many to catch is quite dependent on this particular year class, at least until we see what's coming beyond 2013.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to take Patty Phillips online, and then we'll go to Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
So what can be the optimum spawning biomass? I mean, we saw, one of your PDFs shows that, size at age was lower, but now we're seeing size at age improved. And you're showing 200 million spawning biomass, but what do we want to build it to? I mean, and can the ecosystem handle increased amount of spawning biomass? I mean, we used to catch a lot of halibut because there was a lot of halibut out there, and that's what we're wanting to get to again. So how long would it take to get there? So thank you. Those are my questions.
Thanks for those questions. Again, it's the management of a species like halibut where there is not a strong relationship between recruitment and spawning biomass is challenging because we don't have the ability to adjust the spawning biomass through harvest levels and expect higher or lower recruitment. We see a broad range of spawning biomass producing successful recruitments, and then we see high levels of spawning biomass, as we saw in the 2000s and even into the early teens, producing lower recruitments. And so there just isn't a strong relationship between the amount of spawning biomass in the water. And that's why historically, management of Pacific halibut has not tried to target a specific level of spawning biomass and hold that steady. We've recognized that this stock, given its variability, both in the biology and in the distribution, may be better served by management that just harvests the surplus as the stock goes up and down across these broad ranges of stock size. So the short answer is there's not much we can do to create better recruitment other than hope for environmental conditions that are conducive to that and avoid extremely low stock sizes. And we don't recognize that we're in near that conservation level of low spawning biomass at this point in time.
Thanks. Chris?
Thanks. Two questions now after that last one. But my first question was, you mentioned the additional risks and being on schedule. Do we have a sense of how often halibut are on schedule and not on schedule?
Yeah, so this is actually was the impetus for the research, the primary research objective that we have right now that you heard from Dr. Planis of making studies of maturity our top research priority. We have collected visual maturity data over a long period of decades now, and we've seen very little response in the maturity schedule, even across a broad range of size at age and other changes in the environment and the biology of the stock. Halibut seem to mature around the same age, regardless of the conditions they're experiencing. And if that's true, that's a fairly resilient aspect of the stock, but we do have some concern that maybe we've been missing something with these visual maturity estimates. And that's why we're going this extra step, more expensive and more time consuming, to do histological maturity evaluation, which is really getting right down to the details. And there's not going to be the same kind of ambiguity about it. So I guess what we know right now would suggest that halibut are pretty consistent in their maturity schedule. But we are in the process over the next year to 2 years of redoing all that study. And unfortunately, I know it doesn't help the decision right now, but we've identified that as our top research priority.
Okay, thank you. My second question actually revolves around your response to the last question and the question before mine. And we set this target, or we set a target reference point for the stock of B36, which was, my recollection was the MEY, we sort of used it as a proxy. MEY, B30 was considered MSY, B30 was considered MSY, and we went 1.2 and we ended up with B36. But from the response to the last question, it seemed you were saying that we do need it not as a target, but as a threshold, because we don't want it dropping below a certain level. That's what I kind of was reading into your, so I'm just, is that a fair statement? It's almost like we don't want it now dropping below this. You said we don't want to set a target, but is it more we don't want it to drop below a certain level? I mean, I know we have the limit reference point, but it seems we're talking about something else.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry if I muddied the waters there. That the B30% as a threshold reference point below which we don't want to drop too often, and B20% as our limit reference point that we really don't want to go below for conservation reasons. Those remain unchanged. The 36% biomass target, you'll note that Dr. Hicks has actually classified that as a fishery objective, and that has more to do with optimizing maximum economic yield over the long term than it does biological considerations. Hopefully that clears it up.
That does, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Jim, you first. Go ahead. And then we'll go to Forrest.
So it's more of a comment. So and we heard Dr. Planas say this I think this morning, is the IPHC or the Secretariat, really considered being able to ground truth their maturity estimates or as something very significant and important. So to me, that means that there is some evidence that maybe it needs to get right, or you may need to confirm that before we get too far down the road. Okay, so that just means that this is something important that maybe waiting a year when the data comes out is something that we may want to consider as a good thing.
Yeah, I think I would agree with your comment that we've identified it as a high priority. There are other species for which it's been found that the histological estimate of maturity can give you a slightly different answer than the visual estimate, and that's why we've prioritized it. But we don't have any direct evidence at this point for halibut that what we're using is wrong.
Forrest, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. When you present your summaries every year, you have a series of graphs that shows trajectories of stock, usually no fishing pressure, 3-year surplus, status quo, and 60 million pounds, or some variety of that. Can you clarify whether the 3-year surplus is driven by a model driven by different components, or is it just right in the series? I think I heard a conversation, or maybe you and I had a conversation a little bit about how it looks at very specific things, the 3-year surplus I'm speaking to, and does it consider this natural mortality change, or is it specifically looking at just near-term factors? I guess how it varies, and also just in addition to that, would you consider that precautionary to fish at that level if we're thinking about the possibility of F43 and 52 million pounds? Is a 3-year surplus a precautionary approach?
Yeah, thanks for the questions. With regard to the 3-year surplus calculation, of course, all the results in the decision table are based on the assessment models. So they all depend to some degree on the parameters used and the assumptions made in those models. However, the 3-year surplus, I would say, is closer to the data as we see it, because it really just depends on the recruitments that are in the pipeline right now. The things that we've seen. We're only projecting 3 years out, so we're not relying on fish that we haven't seen yet. And we have a pretty good estimate of the recent recruitment series. And so those recent recruitments and growth are really what drive that calculation of 3-year surplus. So in that regard, and as you saw in the results, it is much less sensitive to any changes in our understanding of natural mortality or even many other model parameters. So I would say that is a bit of a point of continuity. We saw last year the 3-year surplus was, I believe, just a little bit less than 40 million pounds, and this year it's approximately 43 million pounds. And that reflects that progression where we're now stepping across that period of low recruitment and beginning to see the other side where the 2012 year class is producing additional recruits. So in that regard, I think it is useful, especially in a situation like this where we're trying to make sense of some changes in the stock assessment models. That 3-year surplus calculation certainly gives it perhaps a little bit more continuity, and also it's a little bit closer to the actual information that we have about the stock right now. In terms of the level of precaution, I mean, you can look at the decision table and see the SPR values that are associated with that and compare those to recent years. And I don't have it in front of me, but I believe that the 3-year surplus would put us somewhere approaching an SPR rate of 50%, which would be relatively consistent with the level of fishing intensity we've actually been exerting on the stock over the last several years. So I think that's a way to put it in context.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? None online. Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Stewart. I think we can let you go, and we just have one more info session, which is on the FIS. And hopefully, Dr. Webster, you would be willing to answer any questions people might have. If people have any on the stock assessment process, on the survey, I should say, not on the stock assessment. Anybody have any questions on the FIS, comments you want to make? Go ahead.
Hi, Robert Hawkness, BC Northern Trollers Association. Dr. Webster, I was just curious, Commissioner DeGrief made a comment during your presentation there yesterday regarding the bait size. Is there any way to do a cost-effective analysis of reducing the size of bait? Because I think a third of a pound to a quarter of a pound chunks of bait are pretty large, and I know that the IPHC is looking at ways to reduce their costs, and I noted it last year especially that the cost of bait is quite expensive. So I mean that's a big cost on the FIS. Is there any way to do? I noticed that some of the stations are 8 skates, some are 6, some are 4. And when you were talking about the on your presentation there yesterday, there was one where you did pollock and herring, and there was an 8 skate string where the 2 skates were barren and pollock and herring were on either end. Is there any way to do a similar study this year with smaller baits on either end of the 8 skate strings? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. that is the kind of study that we would have to undertake to understand any effect of changes in halibut bait size on the factors that we're interested in. That includes the catch per unit effort, the size and length distribution of halibut, other biological data, genetic data, the distribution of halibut, and any effect that it might have on our understanding of stock distribution and trends. Is that something we could do this year? I think that would be a challenging project to undertake at short notice. The 2012 study that we undertook comparing different species of bait, that was preceded by a pilot study in 2011 in which we had 4 baits, and so it allowed us to work out our methods and hit upon this 8 skate approach with 4 standard chum salmon skates and 2 blank skates and 2 skates with different baits. I guess, yeah, this is something that I would have to discuss with the survey colleagues. It would have to be considered from a budgetary point of view, which is outside of my wheelhouse, I guess. But it's certainly something we could look at going forwards. And it's the kind of study that we would have to undertake because it's just unknown to me. And maybe folks can have a guess based on your experience what impact reducing the bait would have. But our experience from 2012 is that those effects may be counterintuitive and they may vary spatially, and it's important to undertake that study to understand that. And it's analogous or similar to the snap gear comparison that we've been doing over the last few years, where in order to consider a transition to allowing snap vessels on the survey, we need to understand what effect that has on the catch of halibut, and we've got some way to understanding that. But yeah, I agree. It's the kind of design that we considered in 2012 could be something for use in future study, but things are different now. Catch rates are down, costs are up, and we would have to bring those factors into any design and the timing of that design.
Go ahead.
Could I just have one follow-up?
Sure.
And I know different stations have different skate lengths. Is there a minimum amount of skates that need to be set on a station for you to get accurate number? And what I'm kind of getting at is those 8 skate stations, what is the maximum amount of skates that you need to get effective data from those stations, and whether or not for future survey designs, whether you can use those 8 skate stations to conduct those bait experiments if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. 4 is the minimum number we use for effective stations. So we used 4 chum salmon skates in that 2012 study, and we've used 4 skates for inclusion in my analyses and in Dr. Stewart's analyses in other years as well. If we were to go to the design we used in 2012, we would have essentially 6 baited skates on each station. And it depends on the sizes we're looking at. I don't know whether we're considering multiple different sizes or not. That's another consideration. I actually don't know what sizes are being proposed here for smaller baits. So let's suppose there's just one size being put up as an alternative. So then we could have potentially 5 skates of 6 baited skates of regular chum salmon, a blank skate, and then possibly 1 skate of the alternative bait size. And that would give us some kind of comparison. So, another factor to consider there is that's going to have if we're looking at it, I know there's some concerns about using 8 skate sets from a logistical point of view and number of sets you can fish in a day as well. But that's also at this point with the costs involved, reducing number of baited skates from 8 to 7 or 6, sorry, is going to have, sorry, 7, yes. If we include the smaller skates, is going to have an impact on revenue as well. So that's another factor that's going to be, that could be considered. But yeah, so the minimum we use for input into the our data products is 4. 8 is the maximum I think that we consider for fishing. It is also the maximum for that we've used in the past. I'm not sure if I've completely answered your question. Happy to take another stab at it if you'd like me to.
No, you answered it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think we have, I'm going to go to Tom Markey, I think, has his hand up online, and then we'll go to Forrest.
Yeah, Dr. Webster, I maybe you can clarify something for me. I noticed in Ian's presentation on slide 51, since about 2018, we're showing considerably more variation in our TCEY. And maybe it's just coincidental, but that's about the time, I think, when we started the hook competition and the time-space model. Do you see any causal relationship there, or are they independent of each other on why we're suddenly get such large swings in TCEY? It seems like it's ironic. It seems like the more we learn about this fish, the confidence levels actually get larger, not less, which is kind of counterintuitive, I guess. But do you have any feelings about this?
And I see my colleague, Dr. Stewart, shaking his head. And that's my feeling as well. The things that we've brought in, like the hook competition adjustment and the space-time modeling, have worked to smooth the time series and reduce variation, not the opposite. It's by making better use of the data, by removing, as to the best our ability, the effective competition. We've got a clearer signal in the time series to remove some of the noise that was apparent in the time series for a number of areas relative to what we had before we started doing those things. So I think the answer to that is no, they're not connected.
Okay, I think Forrest, were you next? Oh, Brian. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Webster. Yeah, my question, I guess I'm still trying to kind of formulate it in my head. It may be for both you and for Dr. Stewart. We are seeing the costs of implementing a full FIS increase. And as an effect, we've seen in-law has taken off with space-time modeling and things, and the CVs for that are pretty great. But we're seeing a decreased actual sampling footprint of the set line survey. And I'm wondering if in the future or now, are we having increased reliance or waiting on fishery-dependent data, or are we still carrying forward with the same program? Yeah, I guess that's my question for now.
I'm sorry, I might ask you to repeat the last part of the question. I don't think I quite followed.
Are we going to have, do we have increased weighting on fishery-dependent data for our stock assessment at the moment, seeing that we have a declining actual footprint in the set line survey, or is it still the same?
Pass that over to the stock assessment expert.
Yeah, thanks. And it's a useful question to think about, particularly in the context of the reduced survey that we saw in 2020 due to COVID and the reduced design that we're looking at for 2023. At this point, though, even those reduced designs are still providing us with precise coastwide and regional indices of abundance. So at this point, the stock assessment is still relying heavily on the survey indices and the biological data that's being collected there. The one place that we are going to see some loss of information is with regard to stock distribution, particularly as it may be wanting to be considered for management use if we are not sampling an entire regulatory area, or effectively so, as we saw in 2020 and will be in that case next year for several IPHC regulatory areas. We won't have that level of detailed stock distribution information. And so as we suggested in 2020, that's where we may start to look a little bit more heavily to fishery dependent data to consider whether the trends that we estimate from the space-time model are consistent with the actual fishing that's going on in those areas where we may have very low survey or even no survey coverage at all.
Thank you. Is there any uncertainty with the lag? I mean, as fishermen, we fish preferential habitat, and the strength of the survey is that it's a grid-based design. Is there uncertainty that we worry about, or is that something that you're able to quantify in the risk assessment?
I think there is uncertainty there, and we do, and this is why we have to have a survey and not just rely on the commercial CPUE index, because we know that there are areas that don't get fished very often, and they may have important contributions, or they may be to the biomass estimates, and they may be areas where there's a change in the biomass that we wouldn't detect without the fishery. So there will be greater uncertainty when and if we have to rely on fishery information in terms of trend to help us with some, particularly the ends of the stock, where we may have insufficient survey coverage to get precise estimates of stock distribution. But again, at this point, all the survey designs that we've had recently, and even the design for 2023, we still anticipate will provide us with a robust estimate both of the coastwide trend as well as the regional trend. So we're not at the point yet where that would be a serious concern.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing for 2023, we have robust estimates. In the future, if we see a shrinking footprint, it may be beneficial as a harvest strategy to take more precautionary approaches given the higher levels of uncertainty.
I think that's a great paraphrase. Agree with that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for either? Lyle? Sorry, go ahead, Lyle.
Yeah, thanks. This will be quick. I know that we're going to have an introduction of possibly some snap gear into the charters this year, and they do fish differently, especially depending on the habitat that we're setting in the sense that if you get into really uneven bottom and the snap boats are riding their break, they tight line it across the peaks. And they do fish differently depending on the habitat. So I was kind of curious, you're obviously going to want to use that data next year in the stock assessment or in some fashion. Is there a coefficient or a variable in there that you've come up with already to say it's 90% effective, 103% more effective than the conventional gear?
Thanks, Lyle. In our studies in 2B, 2C, and 3A, we were able to estimate exactly that coefficient by each area. And the 2B and 2C studies were very consistent. It estimated that the catch rates after adjusting for hook competition were on snap gear were 80 to 85% of the catch rate on fixed gear. Unfortunately, the study in 3A gave a very different result. So there's some uncertainty in that, but we are using at present, we are using the data from the snap gear from those studies with those coefficients built in, adjusting for the differences based on the way we estimate those coefficients. And so that's what I envisioned that we will be doing this year as well. We'll be doing our best to estimate the difference between snap and fixed gear and making an adjustment essentially for that difference in our estimates of catch rates and CPUE. Yep.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you both. I think we can let you go. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, so I think that wraps up our info sessions. Is there anything else people want to bring up on MSC, the mortality limits, or the FIS? Okay, if not,
Hey, Linda.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
So can you just refresh my mind on, did we take action recommending the commissioners hold a work session to, do more in-depth study of objectives and performance metrics, or where do we leave that?
I sort of took that as the sense of the conference board, but if somebody wants to make it as a official motion, it would probably reflect more clearly in our proper format. So if you or Chris want to offer that as a motion, that'd be great.
I'll defer to someone in the room for a motion. It's easier to handle.
Okay, it looks like Chris has one. So go ahead, Chris.
I don't have a great one yet. Sorry, caught me off guard there. I just move that the conference board request commissioners hold a special session to deal with the items for discussion, identified for discussion on the management strategy evaluation.
So I think that's a recommendation, right, Chris?
Yes. Yeah, conference board recommend, yes.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Jerry? Okay. Okay, and the ones, I mean, you referenced what was from the MSAB. I had jotted some of those down as objectives, sort of target versus threshold, and
I think it's the ones identified in Dr. Hicks's presentation. He sort of listed, there's a big list of them. I think there's a lot there. I think we can just take those things and bring them into the discussion.
Okay, great. Do you want to say anything else to the motion? Or should we just see if we have any objections?
Well, I guess, Linda, I would go ahead and have our minutes note that there are numerous decision points in the document that Alan presented. Was it document 13 of AM099? And we believe an in-depth discussion at a work session is the appropriate way to address all those points.
Got it. Okay, anything else on that?
Linda?
Go ahead, Kathy.
If it's a friendly amendment to Chris, I would say a work session with the commissioners and industry or something so that they know it's not just something for them, but it's a combined larger conversation.
I think by referring it to a special session, we address that. If you look at how we've had a few special sessions in the last couple of years, and I think it's very clear that that does involve commissioners, their agency advisors, and stakeholders.
Great, we'll just make sure that's clear, that that's the intent. Okay, everybody, can we do a show of hands? First clear online, make sure your hands are down, and then let's have hands up in support. I think we're not supposed to do a no objection, right?
Please put your hands up if you're.
Okay, anybody opposed? It's probably the easier way to do it. And any abstentions? Okay, great, thank you. And I just want to clarify, so is Paul Pear or Ben, are you voting for FVOA now? Okay. He's your FVOA rep now? You are the rep. Okay, all right. I was just trying to be clear for the record. Oh, people online need to keep their votes up. We didn't get those counted yet. Okay, do you all want to break before we go into the fishing period season opening dates? Should we take a break or are you ready to? Okay, I see some nods. Should we try to do a 10-minute break and come back and do that?
4:30.
Okay, back at 4:30. We were just informed that we have to be out of the room at 5, and we thought we had till 5:30, so let's just see how far we can get. So once everybody's seated, or we have at least enough people in the room to go ahead, I guess we're looking for a motion on season opening date. Okay, and I have a request for people online to lower your thumbs and hands, clear your screen. Okay, Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I would put on the table a motion to, just for opening on March 11th. That would be a Saturday at noon. So if I could get a second, I'd speak to it.
Second.
Okay, the motion is for March 11th for the opening date.
Yes.
You want to speak to that a little bit, Phil?
Yeah, we, the fishermen that I represent, we were all in favor of that date, but also I was at the Alpha meeting and we settled on 11th, and then we were concerned about daylight savings time, but that really happens on Sunday morning. So we did move it back till Friday, but now we're talking just Saturday. Daylight savings time starts on Sunday, so we don't have a conflict there. But there's some really changes going on here in the fishery here. Well, the second reason we wanted that date is just to make sure NIMS has the time to get out all our documents and give them an orderly time to deliver our documents. The second is the tides are pretty favorable that time of the month. They're not super, but they're better than they are on the 5th or the 6th. And what we have going on this year that's really interesting in the Eastern Gulf is that we're allowing for black cod pots to be left on the grounds, and you only have to haul them every 5 days. That's the legal definition. So this would be the first year we have pots that can be left on the grounds, and as long as they're tended, they don't have to be brought to town when they unload. So that's a change we've had, and I think over 50% of the boats now are pot fishing with slinky pots. So it's better to probably have less current out there and probably better weather on smaller tides. So we're going to have a real mess offshore just for the long line boats that are out there. There'll be some halibut fishing, maybe some conflicts, but between the pot fishermen, the pot fishermen and the long line vessels for black cod are going to be competing for those grounds right off the bat. So we don't know what the tides and current will be, but there'll be a lot of, people trying to feel out what's going on out there at the very start of the season. So this is the first year, and I'm not really sure, I won't be out there, but I'm not really sure how it's going to play out. But there could be a lot of boats out on the edge trying to get their gear in the water so they don't have to move them on certain hot spots. And some of those are in the shallower water where there might be some halibut fishing. But so that's why I would recommend March 11th. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Lenny. Is your mic on?
I'm sorry, yes. I don't know if this would be friendly, but talking to some people in Canada on the opening date, people were thinking about February 28th, and I don't want to speak for them. And then FVOA, when we had our meeting there, we were trying to get the longest season, and we chose March 1st. So February 28th is very close to March 1st. I've got boats that fish sablefish in the Bering Sea. The crews are waiting to get a date to start fishing, and we're tied together. And there's been a big increase in sablefish. So I don't know if it would be possible to try to get consensus around that 28th date, or whether we'll need to take a vote on this and then take another vote with different dates. Thank you.
So I guess I'd look to Phil. That's
I wouldn't accept that because of the tide issue, but also you got to realize that we have insurance issues. We usually do our monthly insurance to the two pools I use. We start them on the beginning of the month. So that can be a little bit of an issue too. So, and then you got to realize too that it's really hard for the plants to get together and get their employees up and running because they can't find employees anymore. So I think the later we can, a little bit later past the end of February, there'll be more fish house workers available because they'll also be bringing in crew for like processing herring and things like that. So I just think it's a better time and a fairer time to start for everybody in middle of the 11th of March. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is for, sorry, Lenny, can you turn your mic off? Thank you. Motion on the floor is for March 11th. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, on Canada, we would like, actually, I'm part of me of my U.S. counterparts, I misspoke. We were looking at Thursday, February 26th as an opening date. We just feel that's a way that we could service the market properly. So we will be voting against this motion. We think that February 26th, Thursday, will be a good opening date. It will allow us to serve the market, and it'll work well with the tides. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Anybody else want to speak to this motion, opening date of March 11th? Okay, I think we're going to vote, and we're going to do it in a more organized way than we were doing it. So we're going to first we'll do US first in the room, and then we'll do the online people. You want to do US, Canada separate? Yes. Okay. No, sorry. They want all, so we're going to do in the room US, in the room Canada, and then we're going to do everybody online. Okay? So right now, if you're in favor of an opening date of March 11th for the season, US side only, raise your hand.
No, you can't do raised hands. It has to be a roll call vote for opening.
Oh, we have to do a roll call vote. Sorry. Okay, I don't have, did we get a new roster? Okay, I'm going to try and work on this roster that's.
Pear?
I've just been informed in my group here. We may have a problem with nymphs on the US side on a late February opening. So that's a consideration for us.
Yeah. Okay, on the Canadian side, Annieville Halibut Association. This is an opening date of March 11th. No. Atlegay Fishery Society. Atlegay?
I'm against it.
BC Groundfish Hook and Line Association. BC Halibut Longliners Association. BC Northern Trollers Association.
No.
BC Tuna Fishing Association.
No.
BC Wildlife Federation. Canadian Sablefish Association.
No.
Council of Haida Nation.
No.
FAS Seafoods. Halibut Advisory Board.
No.
Northern Halibut Producers.
No.
The Chalmers Tribal Council. That'd be me. No. Pacific Coast Vessel Owners Guild.
No.
Pacific Halibut Management Association.
No.
Southern Vancouver Island Anglers Coalition. Sports Fishing Advisory Board Maine. Sports Fish Advisory Board North. That's online, sorry. Okay, we'll go to South.
No.
Sports Fishing Institute of BC. Where'd he go? Well, okay, you missed the vote. Stevenson Halibut Association.
No.
United Fishermen Allied Workers Union.
No.
Vancouver Island Longliners Association. West Coast Fishing Guides Association. I see our tardy person has come back. Sports Fishing Institute of BC. This is for a motion of March 11th for an opening date. No. Have I missed anybody? Except the people online.
Just do a voice call for online people.
Okay. So for online,
Do you have?
so the only one we have online is Sports Fishing Advisory Board North. Abstain, okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go through the US side, and I take back what I said. Since we're doing a voice roll call vote, if you're online, I'm just going to call your name, and you can just vote yes or no or abstain as we go through it. Okay, Area 4, Concerned Fisherman. He's out of the room. Halibut Coalition. Oh.
Abstain.
Hey, Lenny, we called your name. Did you want to vote? Your vote's no? You're keeping track. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I missed Halibut Coalition.
Abstain.
Okay. Deep Sea Fishermen's Union. Alaska Whitefish Trawlers.
Abstain.
CBSFA.
Yes.
ACDC.
Abstain.
Kodiak Vessel Owners. Petersburg Vessel Owners.
Yes.
Alpha.
Yes.
FVOA. No? Mike would help. Okay, Coastal Villages.
Abstain.
St. Paul Fishing Company.
Yes.
Sitka Black Cod and Halibut Marketing Association. Cordova District Fishermen United.
Yes.
NGFA.
No.
Uzinki Cape Barnabas. Is he out of the room? Okay. Deep Sea Fishermen's Union. Oh, I already called them. What do we have them twice? Right? Jim's voting for, you're voting for, John's voting. Ah. All right, I'm going to get one of them out. All right. Seago.
Abstain.
Abstain. Alaska Charter Association.
Abstain.
Homer Charter.
Abstain.
Bristol Bay Economic Development. Did I get a vote? No? Okay. APICTA.
Yes.
SPC. Carter Hughes, you online?
Yes.
Okay. Yep, yeah, yes. Thank you. Kruzov Fisheries.
Yes.
CIFA, Kathy, online.
Yes.
Malcolm, or North Pacific Fisheries Association.
No.
Okay. Humboldt Area Saltwater Anglers. Recreational Fishing Alliance, California.
Abstain.
And YDFDA.
No.
Aliucor,
Abstain.
and then Pacific Fishing Inc. Patty online.
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right. I'm gonna do this really. So it passed on the.
Okay, so on the US side, the vote passed 12 yes, 6 no, and 11 abstentions. On the Canadian side, there was 23 no's and 1 abstention. So I think we probably need a motion from the Canadian side as to what your, opening date would be, and go through the process again. Lyle?
Yeah, hearing the difference, I think we'd almost like to split it in the middle. So Canada will make the motion that we'd like to open on March the 4th. Again, for us, it's a big deal with our tides and our other fleets that are out there trying to fish that pay the mortality for their halibut. And it is an expense. It's a big expense. So maybe we can come to some common ground and split the difference and call it March 4th. That's what we'll try.
FAI will second that.
Okay, we have a second. And you want to talk to the motion? Lenny?
I'd just like to support that motion. It would help. I think we're hearing from the commissioners that it might be difficult to get an opening in February for technical reasons. And so I think that's why some of the folks on the US side were hesitant to ask for something they didn't think they could get. So I'll be supporting the motion.
Thanks, Lenny. Anyone else?
Did we get a second?
Yeah, we did. It was Pear, yeah. Okay, should we start the vote?
I don't know what to do on the US then.
To take it, you got a second on the US side.
I know, but it passed. The other one passed.
Well, we'll see what happens. We'll have to take it away. Who knows? All right, we'll go to on Canada side. Okay. Annieville Halibut Association. Allegay Fishery Society.
Yes.
BC Groundfish Hook and Line Association. BC Halibut Longliners Association. BC Northern Trollers Association. BC Tuna Fishing Association. I heard that. Sorry, I was just totally losing my spot. The BC Wildlife Federation. Canadian Sablefish Association. Council of Haida Nation. Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you. Yes, okay, thanks. FAS Seafoods. Halibut Advisory Board.
Yes.
Northern Halibut Producers. Nechana Tribal Council. Yes. Pacific Coast Vessel Owners Guild. Pacific Halibut Management Association.
Yes.
Southern Vancouver Islands Coalition. Try to use your mic, remember, please. Sports Fish Advisory Board Maine.
Yes.
Sports Fish Advisory Board North. Sorry, South.
South, yes.
I got North before South. Sports Fishing Institute of BC.
Yes.
Stevenson Halibut Association. United Fishermen's Allied Workers Union. Vancouver Island Longliners Association. And West Coast Fishing Guides Association.
Yes.
So online, Sports Fish Advisory Board North. Michael Fowler. Abstained. Okay, thank you.
Oh, is he here?
He's on 23.
Yeah.
Chad is online now? Oh, okay. All right, let me get him added back in. Okay, I guess we'll go through the US side. It's a little unclear to me how to handle this. I mean, the last vote was 13 yes, 6 no, and 11 in abstention, which technically abstentions count as no's. So, but we'll go through voting on this one and see how it compares to the last vote, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to call the roll for a motion on opening date of March 4th. And then we'll figure out what to do next. Okay, Area 4 concerned fishermen.
Yes.
Try and keep good track too. Halibut Coalition.
Abstain.
Alaska Whitefish Trawlers.
Abstain.
CBSFA.
Abstain.
ACDC.
Abstain.
Kodiak Vessel Owners.
Yes.
Petersburg Vessel Owners.
No.
Alpha.
No.
FVOA. Coastal Villages.
Abstain.
St. Paul Fishing Company.
Abstain.
Sitka Black Cod and Halibut Marketing. CDFU.
No.
NGFA.
Yes.
Uzinki and Cape Barnabas. Deep Sea Fishermen. Seago.
Abstain.
Alaska Charter.
Abstain.
Homer Charter.
Abstain.
Bristol Bay Economic Development. Still missing. Okay. APICTA. I didn't.
No.
No. Okay, thanks. Freezer Longline Coalition.
Yes.
Seafood Producers Cooperative.
Yes.
Cruise Off Fisheries.
Yes.
SIFA.
I appreciate the compromise, but no, because I don't think our process can get the permits done in time.
Okay, North Pacific Fisheries Association.
Yes.
Okay, Humboldt Area Saltwater Anglers. Recreational Fishing Alliance.
Abstain.
YDFDA.
Yes.
Aliu Corps.
Abstain.
And Pacific Fishing Inc.
No.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I guess we ended up with more yes votes for March 11th than for March 4th on the US side. Noes and abstentions were bigger than yeses on both sides. So I'm not quite sure where that leaves the US side, pretty split between those two dates. And I guess we'll just reflect that in our report to the commissioners. And then it's pretty clear, I think, what passed on Canada.
Yeah,
for
so
Canada.
for Canada, it was 23 yes, 0 no's, and 1 abstention. So basically, Chuck?
Yeah, thanks. Just for our records, could we have what that number was on the States, if you don't mind?
The last vote for the states?
Yeah, last for the states was 10 yes, 8 no, and 12 abstentions.
Linda, I have a question if it's not out of order.
Go ahead. I didn't see.
I'm just curious why abstentions count as no's. The vote turned the second time. You know, I think there were some people that voted no the first time, that abstained this time. So I think that if this had been the first motion, it would have carried. Thank you.
Well, that's just sort of a.
Yeah, it just, maybe it's more of a comment, and I don't have a problem with how you're proceeding. Thank you.
It's not clear to me, you know,
count it.
just abstentions are abstentions. You basically didn't participate, right? So it goes down to yes and no's, and but I think it's useful to hear, you know, for the commissioners to know that there was a number that just abstained from voting for whatever reason. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, in this case, you know, on the US side, both dates had more yeses than no's, and we'll just reflect that it's split between those dates. Okay, we don't have a lot of time left. We're supposed to be out of here at 5. 1 minute. I don't know if anybody wants to put a date on the table for consideration overnight. Go ahead, Per, for the closing date, and then we'll take it up in the morning.
Closing date, same as last year, December 7th.
Okay, so that's been moved and seconded. Chris, you got 30 seconds.
Are we going to pick this discussion up tomorrow? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll save my comments for tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, they need us out of the room to set up for Dr. Hicks's presentation, so they want us to clear out quickly. But so we'll take it up tomorrow. I think we're starting at 9.
We started at 8:30.
It says 9 on the schedule.
Huh? Yeah, but we can start earlier if we want.
Well, okay, it says 9 on our agenda. Do people want to start? What's the mood of the group? Stick with 9, or do people want to get started earlier?
We got a lot of stuff to get through tomorrow.
Earlier? Okay.
8:30.
Everybody good with 8:30? Okay, 8:30 it is. See you all at 8:30.
Bye. Thank you.